See, I've been informed that the man in the booth now has some form of carpal tunnel trying to follow me with the camera. So I've been told to stay in this range. The second mistake I did was slobbing my soup on my suit jacket, at which time my wife said, "You can't go up there." So, yeah, hard to tell what's going to happen by the end of the week. I don't know. Yeah, Minot, North Dakota. I'll tell you just a brief thing. I met several of you who have said that you've been there, and those classic "why not, my not" kind of things, you know. Anyway, one thing I loved about, I knew that was a place I needed to stay and preach forever. A young man there was from Kentucky. He's a song leader. His name is Landon. And first time he introduced me, I think it was a part of his tradition in growing up, he said, "Now the lesson of the hour." And I thought he said for an hour. And I said, "Yeah, I'm coming." But he later clarified that the wrong preposition. But anyway, I'm grateful to be here with you. I've had a great meal. Let me give you, we're talking practicality. Where are the teachers, people that teach? Come on now. I've never known a teacher to be ashamed. All right, how many of you teach in public school? Oh, good. I was telling a gentleman at lunch, the toughest group to teach, for teachers to teach and speak to are other teachers, because they know stuff. But the teachers out there, let me tell you, the first thing we're going to talk about in the comparison between religious education and secular education. If I walked into a classroom to teach and you were spread out like this in my classroom, I wouldn't put up with it. I'd make every one of you to move up here in the front. Wouldn't we? It's called classroom management. I can't have you, because we know what kind of people sit in the back, don't we? That's on account of that's who we were. I was that, you know. I didn't like to sit in the front either. So in my classroom, in the public school, see, when I went to Texas, I had taught private education for 17 years in Billings, Montana. We started a school from ground floor. And my two eldest children, I'm the only teacher they've ever known, K through 12. You can ask what trauma that put them through later. Anyway, the reality is that when I went to public education, I had just gotten back from Africa, and we were looking for, new mission field. So I got an opportunity. Actually, I applied to go to Alaska. I did. I had two opportunities, Alaska or Texas. And so in my interview to come to Alaska to teach, they said, what is your position on the separation of church and state? And I said, what separation? End of interview. So, as a result of that, I got the opportunity to go to Texas. So I went down to Texas, and time to teach. I taught Texas history. And somebody finally figured out that I wasn't from there. I was born and raised in West Virginia, been living in Montana. And so finally I had some brave soul in my class. Excuse me, Mr. Batteiger, why are you teaching Texas history? And I simply said, because somebody's got to set the record straight. So I have been a part, and I'm telling you, why did we spend millions of tax dollars training teachers to tell them how to manage their classrooms? Because there are certain things that the human condition and such are good for learning and not good for learning. And so we say move up. So let me say something to you practically in your classrooms. Don't let people do this. Especially don't let kids do it. Okay, don't let them sit in the back. Get them up there where they have to see you, okay? They'll come to love you, maybe. Anyway, but what I did in my classroom is that every beginning of the year, at the very start of the new class period, we were 6th, 7th, and 8th. I taught middle school, 8th grade U.S. history, and I chose them on, people say, why'd you teach that crazy bunch? And I said, man, I love those kids. I said, there are moments in their lives in which they're able to carry on an intelligent conversation. And you can still scare the snot out of them if you have to. That's what I liked about it. So I'd say, come on in, and they'd come in, and I'd say, no, this is not, I did this for years. And I said, tell me what kind of a student you were. They were all out in the hallway. All my other fellow teachers, they had all their kids in the classroom, and you could see through the window and people flying by and everything. And I'm saying, tell me what kind of student you were. And they would say things like, I don't know. Excuse me. You've been going to school for 7 years, and you don't know what kind of student you are. Nope. What kind of grades did you make? I don't know. Well, by golly, then I guess we're going to have to put you in the front. I put all of the challenge students, to try to be politically correct, in the front, and all the geniuses in the back. And boy, you know who was most upset? The geniuses. They'd be puffing and puffing, and they would go. So, and of course, you always have one or two that always knows the answer to everything. And they'd get tired of holding their hand up because I never called on them. It took about 6 weeks to figure that out. I know you know it. I'm not after you. I'm after these poor souls up here that don't. Boy, that was a hard thing to get through to the parents, too. When I had parent-teacher conference, it looked like it was a ride to the roller coaster line. They didn't like me much because I came from private school. I came from a church school that we started, and I believed that the Bible was the way to teach kids. You don't work, you don't eat. You don't turn your homework in, you don't get a grade. Now, do you know that they're teaching in schools not to do homework at all? You know they're cutting back on homework all the time, more and more and more, to the point to where they won't even have students do it? Anyway, I didn't say my methods were perfect. I just said in the 13 years that I taught in Texas, I had an outstanding record in the region as having some of the highest scores, if not the highest scores, of any class. Because even though my first year I failed 36% of my entire class. You know what the principal tells you is the average, that the acceptable average is right around 6 to 9%. I failed 36 of my kids the first year I was there. Some of you parents are all going, oh no. But you know what? By the end of the year, I had a 95% pass rate on the state test. Because I did. Jesus did not put the bar. So, I'm not perfect. I didn't do all the right things. I made a few mistakes along the way. But I used biblical principles to get results. Because He's the best teacher. How many of you teachers out there love in-service? Okay, thank you. The Bible's the best in-service that you could possibly do. Read that thing and study it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that on Saturday, so I hope you'll come. And we'll talk about some practical things, and I have some reading materials for you. And there is a handout, I believe, out on the foyer. Single sheet of paper. Robert? He might be up in the booth. I have a list of 10 scriptures that if you're coming to the meeting on Saturday, I'd like you to pre-read those scriptures. We're going to talk about them. I also have what is referred to as the 7 laws of teaching. It's actually from a book written in the 1800s. And it gives those, and we'll talk about those in a part of our practical side of teaching in the classroom. So I've left that for you. Let's get back to our topic. The Old Testament manuscripts that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 1946. There was a fragment of every book from the Old Testament found in those caves except the book of Esther. A complete text of Isaiah was discovered. Now, what you have to understand about that is at the time that the manuscripts were discovered, there was a tremendous upheaval in our country challenging the validity of the Bible. The critics were starting to come out of the woodwork, both the textual critics as well as the science critics and so forth. And so the story of Jesus' crucifixion is found in Isaiah. The predictions concerning crucifixion were considered to be written after the fact. You know, Jewish law, stoning is the method of capital punishment. And so it sounds rather interesting that a Jewish prophet would describe a crucifixion for its Messiah. That's unusual, certainly. But the details of how that crucifixion was to take place, given the time frame in which Isaiah was supposedly to have written, was rather interesting. And the critics tore it apart and said that it was actually written after the fact. Somebody witnessed the crucifixion and wrote it post haste until the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're dated, the conservative is 125 years BC, and many scholars dated him older than that. Which proves what? They were not written before or during or just after Jesus' crucifixion. They were written hundreds of years before the event. Documentable proof. The whole scroll is available if you ever go to Israel. They have a museum built for it, and the scroll goes all the way around, and they've been looking at that thing. You know why? It's what really shut the critics up, is because the manuscript is identical to what you've got in front of you. And no other literary work brags. Yeah, like the Bible. Great thing to study. That's a part of what I tell kids. I'm not some religious wacko who goes around believing anything that comes down the pike. I got reasons. I got real academic reasons for what I believe and why I believe it. I spoke for you this morning about the imagery as found in the Revelation concerning the one half of what will take place when the Lord comes back. But now we're going to kind of interject what happens in between. And when the serpent saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he went and he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But to the woman was given the wings of the great eagle, in which she flew off into the wilderness to be nourished for times, and half a time. Oh, and the serpent poured forth water from his mouth, that he might sweep away the woman with a flood. But the earth helped the woman, and opened its mouth, and swallowed all of the water that came forth from the serpent's mouth. And the serpent was enraged. He wasn't angry. He wasn't just a little ticked off. He was enraged. And he went to make war with the offspring of the woman. Those who keep the commandments of God, and those the testimony of Jesus. That's you and me. We are in a war. And we're treating the enemy like they're our friends. But I want you to be clear on who the enemy is. We've covered in the first lesson why God created in a very simplistic structure, what the Bible is for, and why those words are so important that he gives his explanation. Now, from a purely logical situation, if that stuff above is true, why would anyone not be like God? Why wouldn't you want to be like him? That's because there's a devil. He's real. You talk to young people and you say, they hear the word devil or serpent or Satan in church, they're going, yeah, that's like, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings stuff. It's cute, but we don't buy it. There's a devil. The writers has already indicated to us the nature of it. We might have endurance and through the encouragements of the scriptures, we might have hope. Hope for what? When the books are opened and they are judged according to the things which are written in the books, we want to be in the other book, don't we? The book of life. That's what I'm doing, trying to hear. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. And what was faith? Faith is what you believe to be true. What's biblical faith? What you believe to be true about the Bible. What's justifiable biblical faith? What you are able to produce based on evidence. What you say you believe based upon the evidence. So when you say you believe in Noah's flood, what do you got? Well, I got a geological column out there that says something big happened. Right? When I want to talk about the city of Babylon and how it was described by the prophets as being almost indestructible, except for the one factor that God said you're going to fall. The gates were 15 feet high, solid brass. The walls were thick enough to have 6 to possibly 7 chariots abreast, 100-foot high, built over top of the Euphrates River. The east side was full of the Swan. It was literally almost impregnable, but God said you will fall. And on a particular night, at a particular time, there was a hand that showed up and wrote on the wall, "You've been weighed in the balance and found wanting." And we have historical documentation that says that on that night, Darius and his army slipped down into the city by diverting the Euphrates River just enough to where he could march his troops right underneath and came right up on top, and they took the city almost without defense. That doesn't even touch the other historical, archaeological evidence of Tyre and Sidon, and there's a lot out there. And you parents need to learn that stuff. I don't want to learn that. I didn't go to school. Are you concerned about your child's eternity or not? This stuff is not optional anymore. I want to really reiterate that point. So, how do we keep that next generation? Learn the book. Learn it. I mean learn it. Just like you learn math, just like you learn social studies, science, English. Learn the book. Acquire a faith that saves you. Study it with the intent to say, I can not only understand it personally well enough to be confident that if you want to put a gun to my head and shoot me, I'm still going to say, go ahead, but to be able to pass that on to the next generation. This afternoon we want to talk about the schemes of the devil, Revelation 12, as we have already looked. I saw it in the bulletin. We, the church, are interested in this thing called the Great Commission. That's a term we've applied to it. The Bible doesn't actually use those terminologies, but that's okay. It reiterates the idea. I want to speak to you a little bit about the state of the Great Commission. Usually on settings like this is kind of more the core of the group, and I'm appreciative of you being here. So how many of you have ever been through your lifetime or even recently when the preacher preaches about the Great Commission, that when he's all done, you feel guilty as could be? Oh, the preacher! Okay, the elder says I'm guilty. Well, I want to tell you something. You know, not everybody's a mouthpiece, not everybody's a hand, not everybody's a foot, not everybody's a mouth, and we need to keep our doctrine together on that. We can't say one thing in one direction, one in the other. It's everybody's job to take the gospel to everybody. Well, yes, that's true. But it's not everybody's job to have the background and the knowledge and the base to be able to do it at the same level. I could not probably compete with the Apostle Paul. That's why we're not supposed to compete with either one of us. But we have an obligation to do what's in our sphere of responsibility, and our children are definitely within our sphere of responsibility. So we need to learn that much. But don't feel guilty about, well, I didn't go to Thailand. Like this brother. You have to be built to go to Thailand. Right? They have things over there that just aren't appealing to the Western world. Things that move in the night. Food. When we were in Africa, one of the things that my wife had to get accustomed to was when we bought rice. And she, okay, we'll go down and we'll do a little of that zippy minute stuff. And, well, it ain't that. And then you have to realize that you have to put it in the sink and let the boll weevils float to the top. You got to skim them off. Well, you could leave them if you want to. But she was accustomed to skimming them off and those kinds of things. And, of course, there's no natural, on the contrary, there is a natural sewer system. It runs in the street. Every time I gave a presentation about Africa, I just wish I could have scratch and sniff. That would really bring a sense of what's going on in there. So I want to talk about the state of the Great Commission. So in the next slide, I want you to pay attention closely. It's kind of a video. In the upper left-hand corner of it, you're going to see a date. And that date represents the starting point of the full gospel message. And this will be kind of a visual of the progression of the gospel through the years. That's the Roman world at the time of Jesus, depicted by the color red. And then, as you're going to see, where the gospel begins to grow as it spreads from the Middle East. Notice what happens to it periodically. Now, this is the 400s, which is the time of the writing of the Vulgate, the Latin version. We begin the incursion of the Muslims into Europe through the period of the Crusades. We break some barriers. Then we have a kind of an explosion in the Asiatic region. Coming up on my favorite year, 1492, Columbus sailed the blue. He took Christianity, as was understood by the Spanish government, to the region we now look to as the Caribbeans, and there's the beginning of it in America. And over the next couple of hundred years, that gospel continued to spread until it even got up here. So, what's the point? The point is that the gospel has already gone into the world. The gospel has already gone into the world. We're going second, third, fourth, fifth time. Sometimes we have this misnomer, well, I'm going to take the gospel to lost people. Listen, the gospel's been around for a long time. People have had access to it. You might argue that there are places down in Central America where there are a couple of tribes that are pretty isolated from what we can tell. Never had real contact with some. But I don't know if that's always been true. But I know what Romans says. And it tells me that indeed the gospel has gone out, and that the gospel, through the nature of creation, puts man in the same position. They're without excuse. They are supposed to pursue it. So I have to keep in balance. I have a drive to take the gospel, but I should not underestimate their level of responsibility for it. And that's a constant issue in missions. You shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and even to the remotest parts of the earth. That's the command, Acts chapter 1, that was given to the apostles. And you can see that's the way the gospel spread. The outlining ideas are found in the parable of the sower. Some fell on the road and the devil got it. I don't know the details. I've seen it in action. It could be when you send your kid to the University of Stanford or the University of, pick a number. Some fell by the road, the weeds, all of those. You know that. So when the gospel goes out there, the way it's received is different, and we need to be realizing that. Some I can't stop. In the case of my children, I have to realize two things. One, it's my responsibility. Two, they have free will. I know David did not want to hear the report about Absalom, but it wasn't David's fault. How many of you ever had that text quoted to you? Train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. As if it's an absolute. Then what happens to free will? I'm not trying to soften the blow. I'm trying to make it practical. Kids get to decide. Kids get to decide. So I'm not trying to beat you guys up, parents. You know, if your kid is struggling right now or whatnot, I feel for you. I have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. All of them are active in the church. Very active in the church, but it wasn't always that way. I got some of those calls, you know, ringy dingy. Honey, what time is it? It's 2:00. Who are you talking to? Your son. Yeah, it's bad. But I could say at those times that I had done my responsibility of teaching the gospel. Oh, yes, I could have done a better job. But I'm not going to beat myself up over that sometimes. But if I look back and say, you know, I really didn't do it. How many of you, when you drive home from assembly with the saints, ask your kids, what did you learn? And let them get away with this. I don't know. Or, we learned about David. And... right? Is that David Brinkley from the end? No, not wrong era. Anyway, Make them tell you. You learn by having dialogue. You have to engage them with a dialogue. Ask them. You'll be surprised. You might learn something. You really might. I mean, they might pick up a detail because the teacher really liked some aspect of David's life that you never heard about, and they taught it to the kid. It's a practical way for you and them to talk about those issues in a real practical way. And what better time? They can't get out of the car, can they? Today, you just push a button. They're all in. Secondly, the parable of the wedding feast. And the king came in to sit down, and he found there a man not dressed in wedding clothes. And he said to that man, "Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" And the man was speechless. Now, if you and I know anything about life, when you accuse someone of an activity they shouldn't have done and they don't have anything to say, chances are they're guilty. And the king said unto his servants, "Bind that man hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth." The invitation has been made to the world. The wedding clothes have been presented, and they have a responsibility to respond, even your own kids. Your responsibility is to teach them and to deal with the issues of your time. I cut the message short this morning. I wanted to go over a section. We have 6 living generations in America. It's a unique moment in history. We have 6 living generations alive at the same time. There's not very many of those from the World War I era left, but there's a few. We have 6 of them. In my generation, we would say things like there's a generation gap. That's no longer true. There are generation gaps between Xers, between boomers, between they keep changing the names on me, so I can't ever get them all right. But they don't even see things the same. So you have a challenge. But it's your responsibility to meet that challenge. You've got to become sophisticated. We'll see as we go. Knowing, therefore, the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. Tomorrow we're going to talk about motivation. One of the motivational things that God uses in the Scripture is downright fear. The word fear in the New Testament Greek is phobos, meaning terrified. The Apostle Paul says one of the reasons that he persuades men is because he understands the terror of the Lord. He understands it. We have stopped teaching our kids to be afraid of God. And I mean that in a respectful way. You can do all this stuff about language on your own time. But and where do we see it most? In the way we discipline our kids. "Come here, Junior, you cannot say to your mother, 'Don't do that, I'm not going to do that,' and get away with it. So I want you to sit over in the corner and eat a banana." I'm not sure that really communicates your dislike for their actions. See? I'm not saying give them a whooping every time they turn around. I'm saying, why did you take that tool out of your bag? There's lots of ways to communicate to people about the things they need to do and what they shouldn't do. But we've taken certain tools out of the bag, and they're mostly biblical tools. And we're having a hard time. So when kids get up to 16, you know what I get in the classroom? The same disrespect that they give you at home, except for I get more of it. Because now they've learned some legal thing where I can't do anything to them. As I said, when I came from Montana down to Texas, I didn't know no better. Because my teaching was with people within the church, and I saw them all the time. And if they had a complaint, they could talk to me right after I got done preaching. And it was a great opportunity. I had just enjoyed that. I had a situation very early in my career with the Texas history class where a young boy who was nearly shaving in junior high, we thought about giving him his own parking spot. Anyway, he was there, and he and I had been going round and round and round, and it just wasn't working. I said, "Buddy, in the hall." He did the slam and bang thing, and out we went. And I got about 2 centimeters from his nose, and I said, "Here's the deal. You get the first swing, and you better make it count." He was the tough guy in the school. Now, I didn't know any better. You weren't supposed to say things like that. I went home and told my wife. She said, "You did what? We just got here." True story. Number of years later, and I basically, the boy he went on to do and got. Several years later, I went to a local diner up by the airport. We got an airport in Delhart, Texas. It's for crop dusters. Anyway, I was up there, and they had a real nice breakfast spot. They had about 6 stools and 2 booths. And I walked in there with my wife one day, and there was that kid. He's in the corner. He's got a wife and a couple of kids. And you know what he said? Come over and join me. Whew. I said, now I'm going to get it. He waited till I was old. But he went and he sat down and he went on to tell me the story about how he was going to church and how he was kind of turning his life around. And for some reason, he remembered that same moment in the hallway. Now, I'm not saying that's the perfect way to do it. What I'm saying is that if you're convicted about something, people will recognize your conviction. And what they choose to do about that conviction, it's out of your control. But you need to make sure that your conviction is clearly stated, both in deed and in action. I mean, we as parents, we have a hard time with that. We do. We say to those, if you don't get down from that cupboard, you're going to break your neck. And if you don't get down, I'm going to break it. And the child's going, well, I'm losing either way. So I just go in and get that cookie. The terror of the Lord is real. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. These are the places in the world that I've had the privilege and pleasure of going to, preaching in. Next month, I'll be able to go to Belize. That's my first time to a South American region. But I lived in Africa, and here's what I want you to know about that. Metropolitan areas along the world, they're still people, but they're not the same kind of places. Right? What looks like the hustle, the bustle is more closer to survival in some places. But consider the scripture. For some reason, the brethren in Berea were more noble-minded. I don't know why, but they were. I talked about degrees of faith. They were. And I'll tell you right now, I don't know about the brethren that have worked overseas, but I would much rather have the opportunity to speak overseas than in America. I don't mean that anything against you. I just know that it takes me a long time to have a Bible study with 100 people in America. It don't take very long in Africa. I can go to villages and say, hey, I'm a preacher, and all the unemployed men around the tree, they'll stop what they're doing and let me talk for a half an hour, 45 minutes. Now I'll go back to playing checkers when I'm done, but I got a chance. On a Sunday morning in the country that I lived in, I mean, you saw people coming out with some of the cleanest, brightest clothing you ever want to see coming out of grass huts. Because that day meant something to them. I didn't say they all had the doctrine all right. I just said it meant something. They have a religious mindset. We're losing. And we don't want to lose. You love your kids. I love your kids. I love the church. I love the people that have sacrificed their lives over the years for the church. And I'm not saying we let them go, but we have to be realistic about what we're going to have to do if we expect to stop the slide. Jesus said it this way. The Pharisees and the Sadducees came testing him and asked him if he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. You hypocrites, you know how to discern the faces of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the time. In 1910, the distribution of Christians, and yes, this is a generic use of the term Christianity. We're talking about biblical theism. The distribution was that 66% of Europe, that's where the bulk of the Christians were concentrated. You can see Middle East, North Africa, Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and in America it was 27%. I think that might surprise you a little bit. But we're talking about not numbers, but the concentration of numbers. Okay? 2010. Europe's gone. In 100 years, Europe's gone. Okay? The hot spot is Sub-Sahara, and some say China. I don't have a lot of data on that. This is Europe today. I think this is a 2015. The dark green areas is reflective of a population that attends church regularly. That's 30%, 33%. The lighter the color, the less percentage. My brother worked in England for a number of years, and I've met missionaries from Europe. I had the chance to go to Poland to the missionary conference a number of years ago and listen to the men and women that work there. And one guy from Germany stood up. He says, I go to a mega church in Germany. I said, how big is that? He said, 15. Meeting in a house somewhere. And that's the seat of the coming of the gospel. That's the way it is. So it's not surprising that you get reports, say, from the country of Belgium, who's now made it legal that if you want to commit euthanasia or kill yourself, you can do it based upon you're depressed. Forget that you've got some terminal disease. If you are depressed, you can petition the courts in Belgium to assist you. What is that saying about a country and its value of life? 1968 in America. Do you believe in God? 77% yes. Survey says. In 2004, that number has gone to 44. That's just believing in him. Forget the doctrine. That's just believing in him. How's that been? I said I grew up in West Virginia, and that's the heart of the Restoration Movement, the Appalachian Mountain region and all that kind of stuff. Have you ever read anything about the Campbell Stone movement and Raccoon John Smith and all those great guys? They are certainly tied to what we're here today for. They came in, Presbyterians, and said, no creeds but Christ. Let's get rid of all that creed book. Let's just get back to the Bible. That's where it started to roll about the idea of we are a people of the book. The Restoration Movement all through the East. We impacted the world at that time. I actually went to church camp in Bethany, West Virginia. That's while I was a part of the Christian church. You won't take it against me. Maybe some of you will. I better get ready. But I went to church camp there. That's the home of Alexander Campbell. So I toured his home, and I saw his little study room. He had a study room. It was one of those glass deals where you walk up the circular stairs, and up on top it was all glass, and he studied the Latin, the Greek, and the Hebrews 4 hours a day. Why? Because it was important to him. Because he didn't make a ton of money preaching. The idea is that Campbell's significance in that part of our history is easily documented. He is the only major preacher, shall we say, religious leader, to address both houses of Congress. He had an impact. The United States government actually asked him to give them his thoughts on war before the Civil War. What do you think, Mr. Campbell, the Bible says about war? Now, I tell you what, when the United States government asks a religious leader what he thinks, could you imagine anything like that happening today? This is when it was happening. And by the way, if you're not informed, Alexander Campbell was a pacifist. He was really opposed to the concept of war, and especially the Civil War, which split the church in some areas. Cane Ridge. That kind of started it all for us. A movement in the Appalachians. And that led to things like that. And like that. And like that. Today, if you advertise and say, we're going to have a tent meeting, they think it's a sale. You can't pull teeth. Now, that's not true in Africa. I don't know about how it is. When we advertise a meeting overseas, we get people. We get lots of people still. They are more noble-minded. I didn't say that they were any smarter or any more convicted. I just said they're more interested. And it's a whole lot easier to talk to 100 people in an afternoon than it is over 100 years, one at a time. Look at that. Look at all those men with ties on. Yeah, that's in the days when the women sat on one side and the men sat on the other. The good old days? I don't know. We had some bumps back then, too. We had things like if ladies didn't wear hats, you were in big trouble. Yeah, we had a few things like that. What I never could figure about it, some of those doctrinal things, nobody ever came forward and said, you know, we got that wrong. That was a mistake, I think. That's a side issue. Anyway. Oops, I want to do something here. Let's try that again. I should wait. There we go. There are 227 million people in the last major census in the United States. You can see what's happened, various criteria for the study, but you can say that religiosity has certainly declined. 1952, interesting year in history. Korean stuff, Russian stuff, all that kind of stuff. You know, Dwight D. Eisenhower is the only president to have been converted in office. He was baptized in office, not into Christianity as we might understand it fully, but he was baptized. And the later years came out as one of the reasons he did it is because that's when we started to have a little bit with the Russians. And Russian communism is atheistic. And he wanted to do it to prove a point, that we were a God-fearing people. So we got in God we trust and all that stuff during that period of time. But you can see what happened, what was already happening. It was already in the wind. This is the average attendance. There are 108 million people claiming to attend religious services regularly. That's across the board. And as I said, Protestant theism. I think even the Catholics are included in this number. Yes. 108 million. That's 33%. So 33% of Americans that claim any association with religion attend a service somewhat regularly. Okay? Now let's narrow that. This is the distribution of the Church of Christ in the lower 48. Oh, no, we even got Alaska up there. There you are. All right. The darker the color, again, the greater the concentration. There are 12,260 churches of Christ as of the study. 1,153,836 persons, an average 94 members in the congregation. Anybody do the math? That's 1% of our population. Actually, it's less. It's actually about 0.3. So, in the United States, we have a 0.3 population of being able to influence the country. And back in the days of Alexander Campbell, he was speaking between places and places and places in government and even addressing both houses of Congress. They were asking his opinion about war. North Dakota. There are 7 congregations in the state of North Dakota. 2 of them have preachers, and I'm one of them. I travel to a place called Grand Forks, to a congregation to help them out. When I first got there and I found out they didn't have a preacher, I travel over there twice a month. In the congregation in Minot, I love them. They give me a great deal of freedom to travel and to do stuff. And the men are taking care of it. We got preachers. My son preaches. Others, great. But they don't have a preacher. We have been trying to get a preacher in Grand Forks. Congregation size 35-40. We've been trying for a year to get somebody to bite. And when I go North Dakota, we finally got some young fellow that's thinking about it. He's young and innocent. Maybe a little ignorant. I don't know. 7 congregations. 420 people, average of 60. That's not true. I mean, it is. That's inflated like most of these numbers are. We have average attendance about 75. We get peaks in the summer, 90, 95. And we're the largest. And the rest of them don't have preachers. They're hanging on. State of Colorado, 142. 11,000. But there's the telling number right here. Texas, Arkansas, and Tennessee account for 60% of the population of the Church of Christ. Do you know how well my message flies in those 3 states? It don't. Because there's one on every corner. There's one on every corner. They think, oh, Batteiger, you don't know what you're talking about. So if 60% are in those 3 states, what does that say for the rest? The distribution gets really thin really fast. That was actually by a study. According to 2006, 794 congregations of Church of Christ were in Arkansas. That's one of the big states. It's one of the big 3. Okay? 2%, 2.3% of the state's population. But they still were very visible in the state. You can see the numbers. By the 2011, that number had fallen to 714 churches. They're not immune. It's just harder to see it there because there's so many to start with. The membership was down. And within 10 years after that, it's now currently at 704. And that's a study out of Harding University. It's happening. And do you know what the largest block of people that it's reflective of? It's the young people, 18 to 35. Second Peter. This is a cycle that's not new to us. Don't think I'm telling you something new. Anything that I'm saying up here is not new. Robert's preached about this stuff, and I know the elders have taught classes about it. It's just that I'm kind of maybe putting it together in a single line. That's all. I'm not saying anything new. You wouldn't expect me to say anything new. We're supposed to be using the same book. Hey, it happens over and over again. For a brief period of time, mankind gets his act together, and then boom, we lose it. Is the proverb true or not? Well, it's a proverb that Jesus quoted, so it must be true. Right? As gross as that is, and I mean, the ladies, if you have animals, you've seen it happen. We have a cat that does that. I don't know, maybe it's screwless, I don't know. But the dogs definitely do that, okay? Here's the one I want you to pay attention to. This is a clip from 1920. This is this is not the Churches of Christ, this is just this general statement. Okay? Other groups were recording a decline. There were 3 million fewer children attending Sunday school in 1920 than had been before the war. This is not something that happened overnight. It never is. So I'm not suggesting some earth-shattering idea. It's always the frog in the pot thing. The temperature goes up a little bit, and you don't notice it. But the problem is that when you finally come to the conclusion that something's happened, don't stick your head back in the sand. Do something about it. There was a law, believe it or not, in the state of Tennessee at one time that it was illegal to teach evolution. Illegal. You go to jail. You get fined. Bad thing. At any level. That was in 1824, 25, and by the end of the year, we had this. The famous Scopes trial, where the idea of evolution was being taught in a secondary school, and somebody said, no, we ain't going to do that. In a big lawsuit, it became national attention. 2 famous lawyers came down, Williams Jennings Bryant and Mr. Darrow. 2 top, Williams Jennings Bryant, major political official, cross the gold speech, all kinds of stuff. They did it for free. And this town became the center of the United States. I like this one. This is the Anti-Evolutionary League. We got any of them around? These guys set up booths, had tracts, pamphlets, everything, trying to stop it. It's too late. It already started in our country. He was found guilty and fined $100. Now, what do you think that meant to the rest of the teachers in the country who were thinking about teaching it? They were afraid, right? $100, I can handle that. Well, I love the tap dance, but well, seems I have either done something or somebody has done something to me. Could be the battery. Turn to 2 Chronicles, please, with your Bibles, 36, chapter 36. I told you we did the same things. What?
Push the button.
Push the button.
I don't know. It could be.
You make me feel good. That's okay. Look here. And the Lord God of their fathers sent warnings to them by his messengers, rising up early and sending them, because he had compassion. This is, if you're familiar with the book, this is pre-exile. He's describing the chronicler, the newspaper guy. He's describing the series of events prior to Israel going off into captivity. He says, I sent my messengers. I sent my Isaiahs. I sent my Jeremiahs. I sent them to you. And I told you stuff. Get your act together. And why did he do it? So he could chew them out? No, because the Bible says what? He had compassion. Because I don't want the bad things that are going to happen to you happen to you. That's why I'm telling you this. But they mocked the messengers of God and despised his word and scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of Jehovah arose against his people. Catch this now. Pay attention really close. Till there was no remedy. Now that's a pretty hard thing to swallow, isn't it? You think that, well, there's always a remedy. Well, God himself said it got so bad that there was no remedy. Wasn't that the true in the days of Noah? Sodom and Gomorrah? When Korah challenged the authority of Moses. We get to the point where there is no remedy. But that doesn't mean that many can't be saved. And that's where our children come in. This is going to take work, but we cannot deny the reality of the cycle of human beings. You can read this or ask for it, but I just want to say the idea and values of life have been in the past centered in the church more than any other social institution except the family. This is a quote from a government document. Would you like to live in a time like that? Where the ideas and values of life have been in the past centered in the church? Wouldn't you like to grow up in a world like that? Doggone tootin' I would. However, ethics and religion have been traditionally united, but whether this association will continue will be problematic. This is a government document. When? Recent social trends in the United States, an examination of the social state of the United States at the end of the 1920s, under the direction of President Herbert Hoover. His advisors were telling him in 1920, we got problems coming. Ethically, we've got problems coming. As I said, there are 6 living generations, each generation with its distinctive factors. And these gaps, we have got to get rid of the gaps. And the common element will not be our experiences. Well, you don't know what television was like in my day. We had to Leave It to Beaver. Not Beavis and you-know-who head. We had the Andy Griffith Show. Right? My grandson watches that. We don't have television out where we live on purpose, but we have, YouTube, and so we can find Andy Griffith. He loves it. He just don't know better, You don't have to be killing, raping, and plunging to have entertainment. And you can actually laugh at stupid, silly jokes. But that's not going to keep him, because he's going to walk into it one day. 6 living generations, each of them distinct and different. The GI generation, as we mentioned, 1901 to 1926. I won't go to, there's a strongly interested in personal morality and near absolute standard of right or wrong. That's the way they think. Now, this study that was done is not done by a religious group or a political group. It was done by a marketing firm. They commissioned this thing to know how people spend their money and why they spend it. So they knew how to get their advertising, how to get them. They knew the kinds of things to say to them. And so in the GI generation, right and wrong means tell me what you got, why you got it, and just be done with it, and I'll decide. That's the way this generation works. Secondly, the mature silent generation, 27 to 45. Marriage is for life. Divorce and having children out of wedlock were not accepted. Near absolute truth. Did you see a little shift here? We're close, we still like it, but these are social attitudes. Okay? Children out of wedlock, that just didn't happen. If it did, there was a shotgun somewhere. See? Number 3, the baby boomers. That'd be me. First divorce generation. Yes, my parents were when I was 15. Was it bad? Yes. Did it traumatize me so that I couldn't reach the gospel? No. Wouldn't be the first tragedy in a family in the Scriptures. The first generation where divorce was beginning to be accepted as a tolerant reality began accepting homosexuals. 4, Generation X. All that stuff. All values are relative. Must tolerate all people. I have a lesson just on the word tolerance. We got that word so screwed up. Tolerant. I'm tolerant. I am. I'm a tolerant individual. But I do not condone bad morality. So I allow the person, the homosexual, the dissenting person, I protect their right to object. I do. You know why? So that I can have an opportunity to persuade them. If I shut them off, guess what? I got no shot. But I will not put up with their moral choice. I don't have the authority to do that. On the other side of the line, those people are going, we have to be tolerant, everyone. We need to be tolerant. The only reason you want to be tolerant of that person because you've used the word tolerant, and by using the word, you've already decreed that they too have made, that's not for me, right? But it's okay for you to do it. But you're saying that morally, it's not for you. So on both hands, we're both saying what? It's morally improper. The difference is you're going to let them do it so you can look good, and that's it. You don't have their interest at heart. You want to look good. You want to look like, well, see, I'm free-minded. I won't accept that because the Bible won't accept it. But I'll accept the opportunity to say, yes, I understand your position. Now explain to me why you think that's okay. I have a counter-proposal for you. But if I shut them off, I can never get to them. And the church needs to think about that. Late to marry, after cohabitation. You know, live-in situations, you know. Stuff that went on. The millenniums. See that up there? I highlighted that. You say, well, look, they had falling teen pregnancy rates. That's great. That's because everybody was using birth control. At 12. Getting passed out in schools. Free. 1 in 8 members of the millennial generations, 12%, are both married and have children at home today. Only 12% have both. So either they have kids, but they're not married. You get it. The boomlets. I wonder what brilliant man is thinking these names up. I don't know. Anyway. The boomlets, born after 2001. This was a telling statistic for me. In the 1990s, the average age of a child in their target market, that is Hasbro or Mattel, with the Barbie dolls, was 10 years old. They targeted them with things like Barbie dolls and stuff like that. You know, the imagination and doing all that fun stuff. Okay? It's now 3. No, 10-year-olds don't play with Barbies. They play with Call of Duty. Kill them. When I was teaching, yeah, you got some. You done dug yourself a hole, son. I'm gonna watch you. No, I'm telling you. Where's mom? Where's mom? Mom, I'm gonna challenge you to do something. Okay? When I was in junior high, this is a good thing. I love all of you. When I was in junior high, being a teacher, I hear them kids doing what? Playing games, right? Call of Duty, Halo 5, right? All kinds of other little things. If you got a kid that's got Grand Theft Auto, you better not. You have no idea what's going on in that game. They're raping women. They're killing people just for the fun of it. Sit down and watch it. If your kid's watching that stuff, if you don't think that stuff goes in their head and stays, you're... But anyway, they talk about them games and, hey, come on, Mr. B, why don't you get hip? I said, I got two and they work. Don't worry about it. But my sons, my two old boys, they thought, they played a little bit of it and they said, come on, Dad, let's go kill somebody. I said, well, I will if it's you. But, so I bought the game. I bought Halo. And started learning how to play it. And then, of course, you can go online and play against other people in the world. Now, here's the challenge to you, Mom, if your son will do it. Have a set of headphones close by that you can hear the conversation that goes on between the players. If you have children that play those games, don't let them fiddle with that thing, because there's a button that you can push that can cancel that stuff out. But sit down and listen. They swear worse than the United States Army. I got boys up here in the front row that are smiling because they know it's true. They talk to one another like they are objects. So when I played with my boys and my son-in-law. So there was 4 of us ready for a team. Enough for a team. And we blocked out all the sound for the other players. And every once in a while I'd go on there just to try. And you know what was the most startling thing? The women are just as bad, if not worse. They talk like a bunch of drunken sailors. Do you think playing that game every day, forget the game part, it's a game. But being around people that talk like that all the time, it'll have an effect on them. And it's not a good one. In a time of casual sex is the norm, the transmission of STDs has continued to escalate in this country. 1 in 4 teens will get an STD by the age of 25. Ethics and religion have become traditionally united, but whether this association will continue will be problematic. 1920. 25% of all new HIV infections occur in youth between the ages of 13 and 24. I got teachers, when all that stuff came out with the phones. We had a barrage in our school where girls were going into the bathroom, taking naked pictures of themselves and sending them to boys. You think it's hard to teach? Try to teach somebody about the War of 1812 when they're getting a text message from a girl in the bathroom that's half naked. That stuff goes on. Do you think your kids are going to come home and tell you about that? What'd you do in school today? Well, you wouldn't believe it. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. Did you tell your parents when you went? No, I didn't tell them. But when I went to school, when some of you went to school and the other generation, we were still praying. We still opened the morning with a prayer. 1960-61, Supreme Court said you can't do that. 1972, babies will now be murdered in this country. And now in the 2000s, we allow same-sex marriage. And our kids are being bombarded with these arguments that that's okay. And we need to take a stand and say, it's not okay, but not just to say because I said so, but because I can show you why it's not okay. You want one of those? God gave them up to uncleanness and the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. God's not coming down here. Well, I mean, if he comes down here, it'll be over. Okay? So maybe that's not such a bad thing. But he's not going to intervene. There's not going to be some great miracle. It's going to be the Word of God penetrating the hearts of men and women, and they're going to do it. We're going to do it. But we can do it right in our own homes and be satisfied that that's our mission in life. I have 9 grandchildren. 6 of them live within 200 yards of me. Little place in North Dakota. My other 2 kids. I never, we thought it was going to be a glorious idea, but there are some drawbacks. 7 o'clock in the morning, small face, eye level, bedroom. When are you going to get up? But as a whole, we're getting the opportunity to teach our grandkids. We teach homeschool. My kids teach homeschool. My wife is a primary teacher of how to do language. She and I have always worked together. If you want to see, if it's true or not, stuff I've been saying, she and I have, I guess until recently, we've always worked together. She was a librarian, same school. Man, did I have the perks. Coffee, donuts, it's great. She sees the same things, but she sees it from the side of the librarian. Everybody say, we need to get iPads, right? Remember that was? Technology. We need to get computers and technology, right? For all the kids. So we got these cards, spent lots of money, wheeled them in, and they'd pass them out in the classroom, and they'd do some great exercise, and then they'd turn them back into the library to my wife. And they'd start going through them because some of them wouldn't have, logged off and stuff, and there's pornographic sites. They figured out how to get around the safeguards. Junior hires. This is a clip from an advertisement from Harvard University. It was offered by the university a number of years ago. That is Michael Sandel. He is a professor of political philosophy at Harvard University. A brilliant man. He's brilliant. You can go online and take this course. It's about 11 videos. And it's brilliant. It's fun to watch. But what I'm telling you to watch it for is this is where America's going to be in the next 20 years. What he raises in the classroom are questions, moral questions, issues. What's the value of life? Euthanasia. When does an old person need to go? What about abortion? What about same-sex marriage? What about suicide? What about racial issues? What about... It's all on here. And you'll listen to these kids give these answers. Harvard University has more Supreme Court justices on its bench through the years than any other institution. They equally have nearly more Fortune 500 company CEOs than any other institution. This is where the movers and the shakers for America come from. The name of the class is Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? So you're on a train, and you're getting ready to go cross the bridge, and the bridge is out, and you've got 150 passengers on your train. Now, you could throw the switch and the side switch, and there's only 5 people over here on the rail, which you will run over. Now, which do you think you should do? You probably heard the similar scenario about the guys in a boat. Which one survives? He actually brings up a real live situation where in the 1800s, a group of sailors, boat busted up, got into the life deck. There were 4 of them. They got in a boat, and they'd been out there, and nobody came to rescue them day after day, and they were dying. So they agreed mutually to eat one of them. And then, of course, at the last minute, the guy backed out. They drew straws, and he didn't win. But they still went ahead and waited until he went to sleep, and they killed him. They drank his blood, ate his flesh long enough to survive. They were brought back to England. They were all tried for murder. And he explores that in the class. You know, in India, they have villages that the sole purpose of the village is to have young girls bear children so they can sell them in the adoption market. We're up for sale. We are a materialistic, anti-God world to the extent that we do anything for money. Hey, if you get thrown in prison in California, by the way, you can ask for an upgrade. If you got a little extra money, you can get a better prison cell. If you're a politician and you want to, go to some Senate meeting, allow so many people in the room, and they have that real long line of all the guys that want to see what's going on, they can figure out. You can get homeless people to stand in line for you for hours on end, and at the last minute, you give them $20, and then you step into the line. Everything's for sale. We don't care about people. The brother that talked about love and stuff, that love does not mean the same thing as it does in the Bible. You watch that show. He's brilliant. But what his kids are saying is not brilliant. And they come from all over the world to this class. At the close of the Old Testament period, after Israel had been in exile and then allowed to go back under the decree of Cyrus, according to the cylinder of Cyrus that's in the, by the way, it's in the, right outside the doors of the Security Council in the United Nations, a replica of it. Matches the decree in the book of Ezra to a T. It wasn't long after they had had the opportunity to go back and actually rebuild the temple, even though it wasn't as good as the one of Solomon's. It wasn't long until they were headed back down that idolatrous road. And the cycle was being repeated again. But here's the bright spot as Malachi records it. And when those who feared Jehovah spoke among themselves, Jehovah paid attention and he heard them. And a book of remembrance was written before him of those who feared Jehovah and esteemed his name. And Jehovah said, those ones, they're mine. For in the day that I make them my treasured possessions, I will spare them as a man spares his son who has served him. Then you will see the difference between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who do not serve him. We have to draw the line. There must be a distinction. We cannot reach our children, we cannot reach our communities unless they can clearly see we don't think, we don't act, we don't do the same things that they do, and we're better off for it. Tomorrow we'll talk about motivation. How to motivate us, how to motivate our kids, biblically. Thank you for your attention.